We are an organization which predominantly focuses in dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, but today we are doing a hyper focus on autism. Now, Nat, haven't you already done autism before? I have loads of time, but we have mostly been focusing on the DSM-5 clarification of autism. That is what I've been using because I work a lot with the American side of things and the APA. What about the UK version, the ICD-11? If you don't know what any of that means, don't worry too much. But basically, today is going to be hyper relevant to the UK version of our understanding of autism, which is slightly different. And when I say UK, it's pretty much a majority of the world apart from America. Now, here's a picture of me in a poorly ironed shirt on the BBC, just to let you know that I do stuff related to neurodiversity. I would say I'm a good jack of all trades. I have a broad knowledge of neurodiversity and a master's in neuroscience. Almost. I'm on my final, so it will not be long now until I can officially say I have a master's in neuroscience, rather than just having to put a little disclaimer that pending. Now, our lovely team here, we've got myself in the chat today, and we've got April. We are neurodivergent experts by experience. So we are. Myself, I have autism, so I'm talking from personal experience as well as professional experience, as well as April. Do check out our team if you're ever looking for support. We're based in the UK, but we do offer a bit of support worldwide as well. Now, our last webinar we did last year is now online, so do check it out. It was basically VR and ADHD. How do those two worlds collide? We know that diagnosing individuals is very difficult because it's psychiatry. You have to observe it and then document it. But what if you could do it in other, more engaging, more realistic, accurate ways? That is exactly what we're looking at with VR. Really fascinating, and it's online now, so do check it out on our YouTube channel. A quick thing on what is neurodiversity. While we're going to be doing that a lot today, here is a lovely little score, and this is called the Spikey Profile. Essentially what it's saying, being neurodivergent isn't about things that you aren't very good at, low spikes. It is about the fluctuation of ability, about your high spikes and low spikes. Today, while we are going to talk about a lot of things which are probably deficit related, do know that autism has a lot of strengths as well. We are going to be trying to look at whether you or someone you know potentially may have autism. Now, of course, we aren't diagnostic professionals, so this is just a kind of like a fun activity to give you a starting point to make further observations, go to your GP later down the line. Could I have autism? Yes, you could. But before you start booking up your GP's appointments, because you're probably not going to get one anyway, good to lay the foundations and see if there's at least some merit to look into first. You can see here, this is a big old spectrum. Before, you had like different brackets of autism. Then we're like, that's not that great. Let's have a big old spectrum. And then people are like, I don't know if I like the spectrum idea. Some people are going to talk to the autistic wheel now. And this is looking at different areas where you might have highs or lows in. Here's a disclaimer, because you always get those people, those trolls. Today's information should not be taken as a self-diagnosis. We can't do that, but fingers crossed you knew that. You do have to go to your doctor to get a diagnosis. Today is a starting point for a discussion. As long as everyone's aware of that, we can move forward nicely. Oh, Marcus is on a waiting list for autism assessments following a nephew diagnosis. Good luck on that waiting list, Mark. But I think today will also help you have more of a firmer idea whether or not you relate to some of the things that go into a diagnosis for autism. Here's some potential terms that you may not be familiar with, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So neurodevelopmental disorders, all that means is a condition affecting brain development and functioning from the womb or early on. When your brain's still growing, those are neurodevelopmental disorders. If something isn't going quite to plan, that is what autism is. Social communication challenges, this is difficulty in understanding and participating in social interactions. Are you like always really awkward and you're struggling to bounce back off of people? That's what it could mean. Repetitive behaviour. Do you like doing things again? Do you like doing things again? Do you like doing things again? Bit of a dad joke there, but people like that comfort in that repeatednessisms. Made up a nice word there. Sensory sensitivities. This is being sensitive or not sensitive to senses like sight, touch, smell, tactile, all those sorts of things. And that's really important that it's not just being sensitive in one way, it can also be the opposite. We've got functional language issues, trouble using language in everyday situations. In theory, you might know a lot of words, but the way that you join them together can be a little bit clumpy. And we've got pragmatic language issues, trouble using language in everyday situations, problems with understanding everyday social languages. If you can't understand jokes from Christmas crackers, I don't think that means you have autism, but if the general joke, maybe. And social naivety, being more likely to be tricked or not understood well in social cues. And actually, I think this one is often understated when it comes to autism. Why can autism be such a worrying condition to some is that you're at potential risk of being manipulated. It's very easy for people to trick you just because of the kind of nuances or the gaps that you might pick up onto. Anyway, now we've got those things out of the way, let's look at what we're actually going to be using as our source material today. Normally on this channel, we use the DSM-5. However, that is mostly focused on North America. It's a bit more of a narrow scope and it is published by the American Psychiatric Association. Now, the reason I typically have used this is that it is a narrower scope, which means it's easier to start off on. There's less text. It's very easy to read, in my opinion. Now, the ICD-11, this is more global, particularly in the UK and Europe. The document is harder to read. The words are bigger, the document is longer, there's more detail. Now, while that might be a bit of a negative for someone with dyslexia like myself, it is actually a better document. That is why from going forward, we're going to be using the ICD-11. And this is why this document is more up to date than what we've done on previous ones. It also gets updated way more regularly. Now, as well as looking at the ICD-11, we also have other documents that professionals may use in order to diagnose autism. We've got the ADOS. Now, that is the Autism Diagnostic Observational Schedule, but also other ones. There really isn't one diagnostic tool to rule them all. There's loads of others. We've got the ADIR, the 3DR. Sounds like a dodgy knockoff game console. We got Disco. Not as fun as it sounds, but there's lots of different ways that we can diagnose. And sometimes you might use a combination of them. The first one is Autism Diagnostic Interview Revision. Then we got Diagnostic Observational Schedule. Then we've got DISCO, which is Diagnostic Interview for Social and Communication Disorders. See, it's not that fun when you break it apart. And then the 3DI is Developmental, Dimensional, and Diagnostic Interviews. So you can see there's a few here. Now, you don't really get to pick and choose which one you have. It's whatever professional you go to, what is the one that they use. But just know that there are different ones. Potentially, one may say autism, one may say not autism. But that's only if you're like really on the fence. Oh no, in Germany, it's much more difficult to get an appointment for a diagnosis and you're still using the ICD-10. I will say institutions do take their time to get up to speed. I think the 11th edition only came out, I want to say 22, around then. So still quite new. In this book, there are a few things I want you to take in consideration when I ask you questions today. Yes, 22, go me. The things I want to keep in mind is because if you do not keep these in mind, you are 100% going to walk away today thinking you have autism. And just autism isn't a checklist box. It's okay, I've got that, I've got that, I've got that. There's more to it. It's more about how it affects you on a day-to-day and for how long it has affected you. For instance, how social interactions, have they always been challenging? If I ask you, do you sometimes struggle to make friends? Of course, we've all struggled to make friends in the past. But has this been something which has always been there? Now, that is what we're looking at. Do you have repetitive behaviors or focused interests? How do these affect your daily life? So, yeah, maybe you might say, I don't know, struggle with repetitive movements. But if it has no bearing on day-to-day life, what's the point of getting diagnosed? It's all about how it impacts you. And again, have they been present since childhood? Because we are dealing with a developmental condition, which means if you haven't had it your entire life, it's probably not that. However, it can change how it appears throughout your life. Anna says you've only received the ADOS training in NHS last year. People are behind the curve. What is your biological sex? Now, just a little disclaimer again, if you're wondering, because I know there might be like other genders, I have purposely only done 2. This is because there isn't any data on other ones. So I've only gone with what I've got data on. And the reason why is 100% female. Come on, Doug. Where are you, Robert? Now, the reason I ask this is if you're male, you're more likely to have autism than if you're female. You are 4 times more likely, in fact. So already, this is telling you maybe I'm more likely to. Now, we do know women are underrepresented when it comes to diagnostic assessments for a number of reasons. So this isn't like a good, like 100% hard and fast rule. Not at all. Here, let's kick off with the first question. Social communication. Do you struggle to start or maintain a conversation? So if someone's talking to you and you just drift off, or if you're talking, do the other people just not able to grasp what you're saying? Do they get bored easily? Oh, Emma says there is also evidence that autism doesn't always present until puberty in females. I would say it presents differently, but after puberty, I think is when it becomes more noticeable to how people currently understand autism. But yeah, definitely a good point. As we can see, there is a lot of you. Yep, this is a very classic and autism characteristic. It's that kind of mismatch between communication standards. You may find something interesting, but you aren't able to gauge whether someone else is finding it interesting. Or if there's a subject that you aren't personally interested in, you aren't able to fake it. Where a lot of us can go, yeah, cool story, bro. Someone with autism, not even paying attention. Now, of course, this is different for everyone, and you do not need to have every single one of these characteristics that I'm explaining today in order to get a diagnostic for autism, but these are some of the most classic ones. All right, on here, what I want you to do is to rank your effort to understand the following. So how easy or difficult is it to understand the following? Put number 1 if you find it really difficult. Let's say you really struggle with like expressions, like I don't know, gestures or yay. Or if you find facial expressions really easy, put it to 4th place. Now, this little image here, this shows you all the different types of nonverbal communication, just to show you that it isn't easy. Even those of us who think we are quite good at nonverbal communication, there are so many different types. Did you know that even the way that your nostrils flap, people are able to read in order to gain information about how you're feeling and processing? I didn't. Now, those with autism struggle with all of these areas. These are quite often automatic processes that you don't even consciously think of, the little nose flapping. Apparently, your brain is still taking that into consideration, even if you aren't aware. But those with autism, this isn't second nature. This is something that you have to proactively consider in order to digest that information. Eye contact is a real classic one. Verbal language, that's just normal speaking. Facial expressions like micro ones and gestures. Now, there should be noted, and there's so many little asterisks here, is eye contact doesn't always mean you have autism. Why? Because in certain social cultures, it is not considered okay for a child to make eye contact with adults. Or if you are female, you are meant to make direct eye contact with the male in certain cultures. So you do have to take culture in consideration for when it comes to diagnosing autism. Now, thankfully, the ICD-11 does actually mention this, which before a lot of the old diagnostic systems did not mention culture, situation, society factors, and all of those. Follow-up question on this is in terms of how we use language. How do you use language in social situations? So what I want you to do is, how would you answer this question? How are you? Seems basic, but we all answer it differently. And in order to answer this question, there's a few things that we need to think about before we can answer it. First of all, how are we? How am I? I'm all right. But then we also have to ask the question, why did the person ask this? Did they do it because they genuinely care? Do they want to know how I am? Or are they just replying? I'm also awful right now, but how's you? And that's the next one, is asking back, keeping the conversation going. Are you able to make sure conversations are flowing? A lot of you just went, I'm okay, thanks. You've all killed the conversation. Terrible. You won't say, how are you? I'm good. How are you? This is like basic language. And it's all about understanding, how do you maintain conversations? But this is a nice funny image. Okay, hey, hi. Are you having a great day? Thanks. It's hot day. Yep. All of these are dead ends. They're just blocking it. And it's because the brain is answering exactly what the question is saying, and it's not answering the hidden part of the conversation. Really classic for those with autism. Oh, Gregory says it was great when everyone was wearing masks. It obligated me to look them in the eye and know exactly how they were really feeling. Yeah, the eyes are really emotive. It's interesting that apparently different cultures place different emphasis on different facial expressions. So apparently in the Western world, we put more emphasis on eyes, where in Eastern world, they put more emphasis on the mouth in terms of where they get the most data from. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it's interesting, nevertheless, that how we communicate with every part of our body can play a big impact in terms of what someone walks away with. All right, let's move on to social context. Is it hard for you to adapt your behavior to various social situations? So are you always you authentically, or are you able to like change your skin depending on the situation? Are you like a party animal on the weekend, but when you're at work, you're as quiet as a mouse? Or are you raising hell wherever you go? And a lot of people with autism struggle with that change. We all know there's like a relaxed you, there's a professional you, there's a you when you see the parents-in-law. Depending on where you are in your life, you will put on a different mask. Whereas those with autism often struggle to know when to put their mask on. We often talk about those with autism being maskers, and some of us really are good at it. There's a lot of us who are terrible at masking and aren't even able to. A good example is this little GIF here. It says, "You're late. Sorry about that. I didn't want to come in." Now that is socially unacceptable. Bosses don't like that if you tell them the truth. They don't want the truth. It's like when I asked you, "How are you?" I don't care. I just want you to say you're good so we can move on. But when people say, "I'm bad," or "my hamster died," what am I meant to say about that? I've got a meeting to crack on with. I don't have time to be your therapist. You can see what people want isn't always what they're asking for. And knowing the difference between what is one and what is the other can be really challenging. There's been many instances where I've crossed the line. Knowing where the line is if you have autism is incredibly challenging. LaDonna says, "I've learned how to mask as a result of constantly being ostracized." Sorry to hear that. Now, masking is a skill you pick up and learn along the way, but it isn't a skill that you necessarily should have to learn. And when people often say, "Oh God, people with autism have no filter," this is what they're referring to. Now let's have a little look at empathy. There's this massive thing where people are like, those with autism do not have empathy. Not true. But the way we understand empathy and demonstrate it is different. How do you struggle to understand and react to what other people are feeling? We've already talked about picking up on facial expressions, but how does that relate to a real world practice? I've used this example before. I think it's good. Here's a picture of the Mona Lisa. She's a lovely lady. What is she referring? What can we infer about her feelings right now? So looking at her, what expressions is she feeling? She looks tired, as most women do. Bored. I reckon it took forever to get that painting done. Are we done yet? Can I go home? Smug, content. You can't tell what she's feeling from a picture, and her face looks neutral. I don't know. Not obvious. Flat facial expressions. Now, ideally, if we all had the exact same information for decoding in our brains, we'd all come up with the exact same answer. If I gave you a picture of someone smiling, pretty much all of you would say happy. But because this image is a little bit like, I don't know, there's a lot of ambiguity. Now, those with autism have a lot of ambiguity when they look at individuals. If someone has like what we call a microfacial expression, much harder in order to decode. Really classic for those who have autism as well. If that sounds like you, it's a possibility. Yep. Ooh, enigmatic, tired of waiting, thoughtful. I find it easy to read the girl with a pearl and earrings expression. I think she looks anxious. Yeah, I like to mix them up. That's the thing with the Mona Lisa. I think it's one of the reasons it's most famous is because who knows what she's thinking. But I normally think that is a classic expression. All right, now let's look at some shared interests. When we speak about autism, you can't speak about autism without talking about passion. I think passion is one of the best things about autism. Some people say, "Oh, it's nerdy." All being a nerd is being passionate about something. And actually, that's the best thing possible. What are you passionate about? What do you find interesting? If you would have a quiz, what would be the one subject you could talk about forever? Birds, anything dogs, neuroscience, philanthropy. Now, of course, every person has interests, but those with autism, they're like, hold my beer, and they take it up to another level. Now, this interest can be so intense, and it might mean that they struggle to interact with anyone on any other subject unless it matches their core interest. it might mean that other areas take a bit of a wayside, other things miss out. I put a picture of the TARDIS here. You might know everything about Doctor Who, and then something about football, you know nothing about. You might find it difficult to integrate with other people who have a more standard, broader knowledge. We got cats. I personally love SpongeBob. Every day for 5 years in secondary school, I would leave at lunchtime, go home, have a cheese sandwich and watch SpongeBob on TV and then go back to school every day. And I made no friends because of that. No, I had a friend. I don't, no regrets. Time well spent. All right, well, yeah, we got gaming, life science. Oh, death. I know that's depressing. Literature, Doctor Who, definite, pragmatism, astrology, nostalgia, friends. Oh, Kira says, my head teacher pulled my mum into a meeting when I was in year 4 in primary school because she didn't believe I understood what I was reading. Jane Eyre. She doesn't know anything. I bet you, of course she knew. Oh, this is great to see passions. And personally, I think this is why we need those with autism in society, because the world has become far too generalized and we need specialists. And what better is a specialist that genuinely loves what they're doing? I know, I don't want to brag, but as well as neurodiversity, I know pretty much everything about the Beatles, way more than anyone should my age. And it's just because I'm like obsessed. It's all I do. Every evening, I'll just watch videos about John Lennon or read books about podcasts. So I don't know why. It's like our brain finds comfort in that repetition. And remember, repetition is one of the key things when it comes to autism. Oh, we also got, I can talk about Marvel Studios and anime all day. Absolutely. I'm currently rewatching all of Pokemon. How did they make so many episodes? Billions of episodes. But honestly, loving it. All right, now moving on to friendship, relationships. This can be a real stickler when it comes to those with autism. And it's quite easily to understand why making friends is difficult. Because remember when I asked you the question, how are you? If you just say, I'm good, the other person doesn't get much from that. People like a bounce back conversation. They like to feel that they are equally as important as you are to them. And those with autism can sometimes struggle with that. Also, because they might act atypical, different to how you may expect, can throw people off a little bit, and people don't like difference for some reason. So making friends can be more challenging. And while those with autism might typically have fewer friends, the less friends they have might be much higher quality, because the friends who like you for who you are really like you for who you are. You might be more polarizing, you might be more Marmite, you might be love them or hate them, but my God, when they love you. I wouldn't worry too much if this is you, but this is also a very kind of noticeable thing. Another thing is those with autism typically might really struggle with networking or social interaction because their battery might be absolutely drained. And that could be from masking, from pretending to more normal or typical, and eventually it's draining. On a very much a side note, I put this as a little image from Mean Girls, and I'm looking forward to watching the musical edition. Routines and rules. What unique routines and rules do you strictly follow? Comfort, repetition, patterns, predictability can be really important to those on the autistic spectrum. Now, in my head, I don't know why, but the first thing comes to mind is like Dexter, the series, from where he has like a whole list of following before he can like kill people. I don't think that relates to autism at all, but the idea where you have your own principle or code. Maybe you have to follow the law because like you are really strict to the point where it's frustrating. Like you aren't allowed to smoke. It's bad for you. And there's people smoking around you. Or it could be that, for instance, me, every single day, I have to eat my shreddies. If I don't eat my shreddies, I'm not having my day. I'm not leaving the house. We all have like little niche things that we have to do. Let's see, folding tissues, yeah, barriers. But you can see it sounds a little bit like OCD. And in many ways, it can definitely be that. But it's also a characteristic of autism. 100% policies, procedures, rules, laws. Yes, autism is more rule abiding. ADHD is more rule defying. If you have both, I don't know what happens. Yeah, I get upset if someone is in my unassigned parking spot. Yeah, those things. You might have, if you go to a classroom or work and someone is in your seat and even if it's open plan, that could ruin your day because you find comfort in the familiarity. I often talk to employers about actually this open plan malarkey. It's not all it's cut up to be for everyone. I'm very conformist. Some people say organized. Yep. Peg colors have to match on the washing line. I cannot be late for anything. It really makes me anxious. this is another one. And if any of you ever wondered why some people with autism are recommended to visit, say, a workplace before their first day or a venue before the day, is to help them feel more at ease. Because knowing the exact route, imagine you're walking to town and your friend, I want to go this way instead today. You might be absolutely no. I'm pretty certain my mum has autism. And when I walk to town with her, if I go any route, which is different to the route that she would normally go in, she'll literally ditch me. She'll be like, nope, I'm going the way I've always went. I'm like, oh, come on, mum. I just wanted to pop to the shop on the way. But nope, she's got it in her head the way that she needs to get there. And she is going to get that way. All right, nicely on. We've got repetitive behavior. Are there any movements, repetitive behaviors that you do all the time? Now, this doesn't have to be in a stress situation. It could also be in a comfort position. Are you someone who rocks about a little bit, moves your legs a lot, flap your hands, also known as stimming? Do you like to sort things out, line them all up? The brain likes formality. Now, there's a few theories to why this relates to autism. And one of them is that the brain is processing information, right? And when you have autism, this information is exacerbated and it takes a lot more processing power to process the same information. Hence why the world could be overwhelming. But if the world has some sort of order or predictability, for instance, if I rock, I know that I'm going to go forward. And if I go back, the brain is being rewarded for that consistent motion. Or if you're lining options up or tidying the house in a certain way, it clears the brain. It does a bit of a soft reset. So this is why stimming can be a way for those with autism to re-regulate their emotions. I think it's no different to when you stub your toe, you swear. You don't have to swear, but you do it because it is calming and it relieves some stress. Those with autism, they probably might swear as well, but there are other ways that they may do it because the world is very stressful, loud, and everything. We're getting on well. Sensory sensitivities. I always think that's a fun word to say, a bit of a tongue twister. But how sensitive are you to things? So on here, I want you to think, are you really sensitive to sound? You might want to do 5 out of 5 or whatever the score is out of. You can texture. Now, this could be about all of them. And the reason is, again, it comes to information processing. So while you're watching TV, you might be like, it's not too loud. But someone right next to you might be like, this is overbearing. This is distressing. And this is why we have quiet times in cinemas or low lights in certain supermarkets, which are autism friendly hours. It's because certain areas might be more challenging for those on the autistic spectrum. Now, as I can see, all of you are just went, yeah, you're sensitive to all of them. Now, just so you know, being super sensitive doesn't mean you have autism. If you have a high amount, either really sensitive or really not sensitive, then that could be a sign. A good example is you might go outdoors and it's bloody freezing outside, but you didn't wear a coat because you didn't even think about it. You could have a lack of sensitivity to temperature. That could still count as an autistic characteristic. Or a light could be far too bright for you, even though for everyone else, it's completely fine. Is stimming and such things any different to people doodling while they're listening? I would say that's different. And the reason why is that people do doodling while listening in order to help them concentrate. I do think there is some overlap, but the reason I say it's different is you might use doodling as an example for a revision technique, but you typically would say stimming is a technique for revision. I do see the similarities. Alistair says doodling while listening is more common for ADHD. Yeah, I think it is. We're almost there, I promise. Oh, and we have our first mystery question. Let's have a quick look. What about not reacting to pain and injury? That is a really good point. It could be that you burn yourself, you cut yourself, and you might overreact or underreact. I remember when I was younger, I'd get a cut and I'd be crying my eyes out. And I'm like, oh, it's just ketchup. Because I see it. And I think then that kind of response on that masking, I'm overcompensating. Or it could be that I've got a massive gouge out my arm and I'm fine. Barely a scratch. That's definitely one. Impact on life. I think this is the last one. And this, I would argue, is the most important one to whether or not you may have autism or whether you should seek autism support. How does it affect your life? Everything I mentioned today, everyone experiences at one time or another, but not everyone is impacted by it in a negative way or a way that puts them at a disadvantage in day-to-day life than others. We've got impaired social interaction. Do you find it difficult to interact with the world around you? but how much does that impact you? Does it have a high impact, which means you might struggle with relationships or employment? Or is it just a little quirk, repetitive behavior? Is this something which people might cross the road to avoid you or might make you stand out in a way which limits you in areas of life? And communication difficulties, are you unable to move forward in aspects of life because you keep butting heads with people and you find it difficult to be on the same page? If you were said these are high impact, I would say that is when you might look to get an autism diagnosis, because these are areas which are putting you at a disadvantage. And hence, that's where the disability comes from. It doesn't have to be a disability, but it can be disabling. And here we've got the triad of impairments. And essentially, this is all the three that we mentioned, either social communication, social interaction, repetitive behavior. If you have all three of those with deficits and all of them impacting you a severe way, and you get right at the center, that is when you likely get diagnosed with autism. Now, you used to get different diagnoses depending on where you fall on this. Now you just fall into the spectrum. And that's because it really impacts people in so many different ways. It's not the case you have mild autism with a hint of cinnamon, or I have extreme autism to the max. You just have autism. All right, let's see a quick quiz to see how all your knowledge is forming. All you got to do is say if it's true or if it's false on this section. Autism spectrum disorder affects social communication and behavior. Is that true or false? Diagnosed in early childhood, more common in males. True or false? If you were listening, you know this one. Symptoms include social challenges and repetitive behavior. Does it often co-occur with other disorders? A lot of you have already mentioned that a lot of you have autism and ADHD, so I guess we know the answer to that one. And sensory sensitivities and routines are common. They are correct. Yeah, they are all absolutely true, just because I couldn't be bothered to do any false ones on the list. But autism is a very complex condition, and we are still learning loads about it every single day. Ultimately, getting a diagnosis is a personal choice. But if you resonate with some of the challenges I've mentioned today, regardless of whether or not you meet the criteria, you would still probably benefit from the support. Some nice takeaways so you will absolutely remember. When we're talking about autism, remember these few things. Social difficulty is a big part of it. Routine preference is another one that is a stickler. Sensory issues can be very distressing. Always starts in childhood, even though it may not always be displayed in childhood. It does vary from person to person. Different abilities, the strengths and difficulties, they are going to depend on you as an individual. It's not that everyone with autism is good at maths. I'm terrible at maths. It depends on the person. You might have co-occurring conditions like dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, very common. The symptoms vary in terms of severity as well. So for some people, you might find some of these things really difficult and others not difficult at all. You might want to have a professional assessment. Now, do know that today is not a professional assessment, but they can be useful. And you can get support through the government if you do qualify for autism. But then there are like different levels on the scale. And while autism is lifelong, it is very much manageable with the right support in place. Oh yeah, Emma says, Donald Triplett really died in June. We're only one lifetime from the first diagnosis. Yeah, so we are still learning a lot about autism. It's really new. And our understanding is changing year to year. If you suspect you have autism, you should visit your GP. They will refer you. Now, bear in mind, it's going to be slow, but at least you're on the list. You could get assessed. And this involves interviews and questionnaires by experts, depending on your age, where you are in life, where they'll use different assessments. So they're all different. And you might want to ask what assessment they're going to be judging you by in advance. 18-month waiting list at the moment. Jeez. There's resources like the National Autism Society or NAS. You can also go on our website, of course, but for more like generic advice, go there. Join support groups. We've got a good Facebook one. This community is quite nice. There's other ones all around, which I think could be a really good resource, particularly if you're undiagnosed as well. And if you are looking to get diagnosed, I would say record your behavior. Try and understand yourself better. Are you struggling for a short time and then does it get better? Or is this something you have consistently ongoing? Because remember, autism is a lifelong condition. It's not an illness. It's not something that comes and goes. It's always there. Now, I just want to finish on this image because I think it's quite interesting. It shows you that in the blue, we've got the core autism, the triad of impairments. But do know that all these other things do go along with autism. So if you have one, it's not surprising if you have the others. They go hand in hand. And here are some other resources just to make sure I don't leave you on the streets. National Autism Society is the kind of key one. Ambitious About Autism is a really nice organization. I've worked with them. Now, the last three I haven't actually worked with, but I heard good things. Now, some book recommendations. The Autistic Brain by Temple Grandin is written by an individual who has autism and is very good at explaining what autism is like from their perspective. Uniquely Human by Barry. This is mainly focused a little bit more on children than it is adults in terms of how they interact, but it's still a useful read. And my favorite book is Neurotribes by Steve Silverman. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for your first ever trip to understand autism, but if you want to understand your neurodiversity to a much greater level, this gives you a complete 360 on what it is. Autistic or suspect you have autism in the workplace, you can get a free assessment. This doesn't mean it's like a diagnostic assessment, but it's an assessment to make sure you get support, equipment, and training in the workplace. All you have to do is go on our website, say you're looking for support, and inquire about a workplace needs assessment. You'll be able to get that. The next webinar for next week, ADHD in 40s. ADHD is also neurodevelopmental, but the way it interacts and the way it demonstrates does change in later life. This could be through menopause. It could just be from societal factors. It could be masking, but it's a really interesting one. If you do go on our Eventbrite, you will see we have so many events that you can sign up to. You've got ADHD in 40s, how not to talk to another person. Do I have developmental coordination disorder, aka dyspraxia? Savant syndrome, really rare, but a really interesting condition. Hence why I didn't say, do I have? You probably aren't a savant, but it's a really interesting condition. We've got ADHD, which is predominantly inattentive. Got so many to sign up to this year, so do check them out. And yep, we do record today's webinar and all our webinars, so do check out our YouTube. Little subscribe button. I know that I've just learned how to make YouTube shorts, finally getting down with the kids. Do check it. I will be releasing one every single day, or at least that's the plan. And as you can see, some lovely uploads. We also have a Facebook group if you want to have a little community and chat to. I do my best to keep spam at a minimum on it, but can't be stopping all those robots all the time. If you do want to see if you have autism via one of our online quizzes, you click here and give the quiz a go. Do know though that these quizzes are a starting point to a conversation. They do not diagnose you. So use them responsibly. And here is contact information if you want to get in touch, find out more about who we are and all of that lovely stuff. All right, everyone, a bit of a whirlwind, but I hope you enjoyed it. And for those of you who are new, do sign up for future webinars. We do them every week. They're a great way to connect with other people in the community and to learn more about your own brain and people around you.